Marcus Chun had always considered himself spectacularly average. At 28, he was a mid-level xenobiology researcher aboard the exploration vessel Endeavour, armed with a PhD that impressed exactly no one and a social life that could generously be described as non-existent. His colleagues tolerated him, his supervisor barely remembered his name, and the last woman who'd shown any interest in him had been his lab partner in graduate school, and that was only because she needed his notes. So when he volunteered for the solo expedition to catalog specimens on Kepler 442b, everyone assumed it was career suicide disguised as scientific ambition. The planet was classified as minimally hostile, which in xenobiology speak meant probably won't kill you immediately. Marcus saw it as his chance to finally make a discovery that would matter, something that would get his name in the journals instead of buried in the acknowledgement section. The irony wasn't lost on him that his life-changing moment would come from something so small he almost missed it entirely. Kepler 442b was a verdant world wrapped in perpetual twilight, its red dwarf sun casting everything in shades of amber and crimson. The air was breathable, the gravity manageable, and the indigenous life forms seemed more curious than threatening. Marcus had spent 3 days cataloging flora and fauna, documenting everything from phosphorescent fungi to butterfly-like creatures with wings that looked like stained glass. He was crouched beside a stream, collecting water samples, when something no bigger than his thumb latched onto his neck. The creature looked like a cross between a mosquito and a sea anemone. Translucent body, feathery appendages, and what appeared to be a proboscis that it had enthusiastically buried in his carotid artery. Marcus's first instinct was panic, followed immediately by scientific curiosity. He'd never seen anything like it in the preliminary surveys. Fascinating, he muttered, even as he tried to gently remove the creature. It held fast, pulsing with a soft bioluminescent glow. Parasitic behavior, likely feeding on, ow! The thing had released something into his bloodstream. He could feel it, warm and tingling, spreading from the bite site through his entire circulatory system. Not poison, he realized with clinical detachment. Something else entirely. When the creature finally detached and fluttered away on gossamer wings, Marcus was left with a small puncture wound and the strangest sensation that something fundamental had changed. He couldn't put his finger on what, exactly. He felt fine, better than fine, actually. More alert, more confident, like someone had adjusted the contrast on reality itself. He completed his sample collection and returned to his temporary base camp, a prefabricated shelter dropped by the Endeavour 3 clicks from the landing site. The bite mark had already healed to a barely visible pink dot, which struck him as unusual but not alarming. Rapid healing was sometimes a side effect of alien pathogens, usually right before the really unpleasant symptoms kicked in. But no unpleasant symptoms came. If anything, Marcus felt incredible. His chronic lower back pain had vanished. His vision seemed sharper. Even his perpetually unruly hair looked better somehow, as if it had finally decided to cooperate with basic grooming principles. The real changes became apparent when the Endeavour returned to collect him. Captain Sarah Rodriguez was the first to notice something different. She'd barely glanced at Marcus during his initial briefing 3 months ago. He was just another researcher, one of dozens rotating through the science division. But when he walked up the boarding ramp, sample cases in hand, she stopped mid-conversation with her first officer and stared. "Dr. Chun?" she said, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "You look different." Marcus shrugged, still riding the wave of confidence that had been building since the bite. Clean living and alien atmosphere does wonders for the complexion. Captain Rodriguez laughed, actually laughed, at his terrible joke. Her first officer, Commander Elena Vasquez, was staring too, though she seemed to be fighting the urge to smooth down her uniform. Dr. Sarah Kim from the medical bay appeared around the corner, took one look at Marcus, and promptly walked into a bulkhead. "Maybe I should report to medical," Marcus said, though he'd never felt better in his life. Standard post-expedition protocol. Dr. Kim, still rubbing her forehead, nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, absolutely. Right away. I mean, when you're ready. No rush. Unless you want to rush. I'm available whenever." The medical examination revealed nothing unusual beyond perfect health markers that made Dr. Kim shake her head in amazement. "Your cellular regeneration rates are off the charts," she said, leaning closer than strictly necessary to examine his eyes with a penlight. "Your cardiovascular health is that of someone half your age. Have you been working out?" Marcus, who had never voluntarily exercised in his adult life, said, "Maybe it's all that hiking on Kepler 442b. "Maybe," Dr. Kim agreed, though she seemed distracted by something else entirely. "Your pheromone levels are also interesting." "My, what now?" "Pheromones. Chemical signals that affect behavior and attraction. Yours are elevated, but in patterns I've never seen before." She turned to face him fully, her professional demeanor slipping slightly. "It's quite remarkable, actually. Almost intoxicating." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Marcus distinctly uncomfortable. Dr. Kim had always been strictly professional in their previous interactions, polite but distant the way medical officers were trained to be. Now she was looking at him like he was the most fascinating specimen she'd ever encountered. "I should run some more tests," she said, moving closer. "Detailed blood work, maybe some genetic sequencing. It would require several sessions." "I should probably get back to my quarters," Marcus said, backing toward the door. "Long day, you know." Dr. Kim's face fell with such genuine disappointment that Marcus felt like he'd kicked a puppy. "Of course, you must be tired. But if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call. I'm available 24/7. Marcus escaped to his quarters, mind reeling. In the space of 2 hours aboard the Endeavor, he'd received more female attention than in the previous 2 years combined. It had to be connected to the bite, but how? The creature had injected something into his bloodstream, but what could possibly cause such a dramatic behavioral change in others? His communicator chimed with an incoming message from Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres, the ship's navigation officer. They'd exchanged maybe a dozen words in the 6 months since his assignment began. "Hey Marcus," the message read. "Heard you just got back from Kepler 442b. I'd love to hear about your discoveries sometime. Maybe over dinner? I know this great little hydroponics bay where we could be alone. Where we could talk privately. About science. If you want." A second message arrived from Ensign Rachel Park in engineering. "Welcome back. I've been thinking about you. A lot. Is that weird? Feels weird to say, but also right somehow. Wanna grab coffee?" Then a third from Dr. Lisa Chun, no relation, in astrophysics. "Marcus, thank God you're back safely. I was so worried about you down there alone. We should celebrate your successful mission. I have some excellent Rigelian wine in my quarters." Marcus stared at his communicator as more messages continued to arrive. Women he'd never spoken to were suddenly finding excuses to reach out. Colleagues who treated him as invisible furniture were now inviting him to social gatherings, offering to help with his research, or simply suggesting they catch up sometime soon. The pattern continued over the following days. Every interaction with female crew members followed the same script. Initial surprise at seeing him, followed by intense interest that bordered on fixation. They laughed at his jokes, hung on his every word, and found increasingly creative reasons to spend time in his vicinity. The male crew members, by contrast, seemed largely unaffected. If anything, some appeared confused by the sudden attention Marcus was receiving, though a few offered grudging respect for what they assumed was some kind of elaborate pickup strategy. "Whatever you're doing, it's working," said Lieutenant Jake Morrison from security, watching as 3 different women found excuses to walk past Marcus in the mess hall. "You've got to teach me your secret." If only Marcus knew what it was himself. The breakthrough came during his formal debriefing with the senior science staff. As he presented his findings from Kepler 442b, he noticed that every woman in the room was hanging on his every word with an intensity that had nothing to do with scientific interest. Dr. Sarah Kim was taking notes so detailed they probably qualified as a transcript. Commander Jessica Torres had somehow managed to attend despite having no official reason to be there. Even Captain Rodriguez was listening with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for emergency situations. When Marcus mentioned the bite incident almost as an afterthought, Minor encounter with local fauna. No lasting effects. Dr. Kim practically leaped from her seat. You were bitten by an unknown organism and didn't report it immediately? She said, though her tone suggested she was more fascinated than angry. That's a serious breach of protocol. It seemed harmless, Marcus said. No adverse effects. Complete healing within hours. That's not the point, Captain Rodriguez interjected, though she was looking at him with what could only be described as admiration. You should have called for immediate extraction. I made a judgment call, Marcus replied, and several women in the room actually sighed at his display of confidence. Dr. Kim was already accessing her medical scanner. I need to run comprehensive tests immediately. This organism may have introduced unknown pathogens or genetic material into your system. The tests revealed the truth, though it took Dr. Kim 3 days of analysis to believe her own results. The alien creature had injected Marcus with a cocktail of engineered pheromones and biochemical modulators that fundamentally altered his body chemistry. His natural pheromone production had been enhanced and modified to trigger specific neurochemical responses in human females, responses associated with attraction, trust, and protective instincts. It's incredible, Dr. Kim said, reviewing the data for the 10th time. The organism somehow analyzed human biochemistry and created targeted compounds designed to make you irresistible to women of your own species. But why? Marcus asked. What would an alien parasite gain from making me attractive? Reproduction, Dr. Kim said immediately, then blushed at her own directness. I mean, theoretically, many parasites manipulate host behavior to increase their own reproductive success. If this organism's life cycle depends on human hosts, making you more likely to engage with potential female hosts would serve its evolutionary interests. The implications hit Marcus like a meteor. Are you saying I'm some kind of walking biological weapon? Not a weapon, Dr. Kim corrected. More like a very sophisticated delivery system, though the organism itself seems to have departed your system. What remains are the biochemical changes it made. Can you reverse them? Dr. Kim hesitated. Theoretically, yes, but it would require extensive genetic therapy, and there could be side effects. The modifications have integrated into your basic physiology. Reversing them might cause complications. Marcus spent the next week wrestling with the decision. The attention was overwhelming and ethically problematic. He was essentially walking around with biochemical cheat codes that bypassed normal human interaction. Every conversation with female crew members felt tainted by the knowledge that their interest wasn't genuine. But at the same time, for the first time in his life, he felt confident, attractive, and socially successful. Was it wrong to want to keep feeling that way? The decision was made for him when the Endeavour docked at Deep Space Station Omega-7 for resupply. The station housed over 10,000 personnel, roughly half of whom were women. Within hours of Marcus stepping off the ship, the social dynamics of the entire station began to shift. It started subtly. Women who'd never met him were suddenly asking mutual acquaintances for introductions. Restaurants and recreation areas that Marcus visited experienced unprecedented spikes in female attendance. The station's security chief, Commander Angela Foster, found herself personally conducting tours for the first time in her career, always managing to route them past wherever Marcus happened to be working. By the 3rd day, the situation had escalated beyond subtle. Marcus couldn't walk down a corridor without being stopped every few meters by women wanting to chat, offer assistance, or simply bask in his presence. A fight broke out in the station's main bar between 2 civilian traders, both claiming prior rights to buy him a drink. The hydroponic supervisor rearranged the entire duty roster to ensure she'd be working whenever Marcus visited the gardens. This is getting out of hand, Captain Rodriguez said during an emergency meeting in her quarters. She'd insisted on conducting the meeting alone, which Marcus now realized was probably not coincidental. The station commander is threatening to ban you from public areas. I can't help it, Marcus said, then immediately winced at how that sounded. I mean, I didn't ask for this. I know, Rodriguez said, moving closer, and I want you to know that I don't blame you. If anything, I find your situation fascinating. The way you've handled it shows real character. Real strength. She was standing very close now, close enough that Marcus could smell her perfume and see the way her pupils had dilated. The rational part of his mind recognized that she was being affected by the same biochemical manipulation as everyone else, but the rest of him was drowning in pheromone-induced attraction from both sides of the equation. "Captain," he said weakly, "this isn't appropriate." "You're right," she said, not moving away. "I should maintain professional boundaries. But it's so difficult when I feel." She shook her head, visibly fighting for control. "I think you need to make a decision about the treatment Dr. Kim proposed." The treatment. The genetic therapy that would reverse the alien modifications and return him to his former, thoroughly average self. The prospect should have been appealing, but Marcus found himself reluctant to give up his newfound confidence and social success. "What if I don't want to change back?" he asked. Rodriguez's eyes flashed with something that might have been approval. "Then you'll need to learn how to manage this responsibly. The current situation isn't sustainable." She was right, of course. Marcus couldn't continue disrupting every social environment he entered. The ethical implications alone were staggering. Was it morally acceptable to benefit from biochemical manipulation that affected others' free will? But the answer came from an unexpected source: the alien parasite itself. Marcus was reviewing Dr. Kim's research data when he noticed something she'd missed in her initial analysis. The pheromone modifications weren't permanent. According to the biochemical markers, they were already beginning to fade. The organism had designed its modifications to be temporary, presumably long enough for its host to attract mates and facilitate reproduction, but not so long as to fundamentally alter the species' natural selection patterns. The realization was both relieving and disappointing. In another few months, Marcus would naturally return to his baseline biochemistry. The unwanted attention would fade, but so would his newfound confidence and social ease, unless he learned to maintain those qualities on his own. "Interesting choice," Dr. Kim said when he explained his decision to forego treatment and let the modifications fade naturally. "Are you sure you're comfortable with the interim period?" "I'm learning to manage it," Marcus said. "And honestly, it's given me insights into social dynamics I never had before. I'm thinking of writing a paper on it." Dr. Kim smiled. "I'd love to co-author that with you. From a medical perspective, of course." Marcus grinned back, recognizing the familiar pattern but also noting something different in her expression: genuine intellectual interest alongside the biochemically induced attraction. Maybe that was the real lesson here. The confidence to believe that someone might be interested in him for legitimate reasons, not just pheromone manipulation. 6 months later, as the Endeavor completed its next mission cycle, Marcus found himself largely returned to his original biochemistry. The overwhelming female attention had faded to normal levels, though he noticed he was still more socially successful than before his encounter with the alien parasite. The difference, he realized, wasn't in his body chemistry anymore, it was in his mindset. The temporary boost had taught him how to carry himself with confidence, how to engage in conversations without second-guessing every word, how to believe that he had something valuable to offer. Dr. Kim still sought out his company, though her interest now seemed based on their shared research rather than biochemical compulsion. Captain Rodriguez treated him with professional respect tinged with what might have been genuine fondness. Even the women who'd been most affected during the height of his pheromone production remembered him positively, if with some confusion about their own past behavior. "So," Lieutenant Morrison asked one evening in the recreation lounge, "what's your secret now? You're still doing better with the ladies than the rest of us." Marcus considered the question seriously. "I learned that confidence isn't about being perfect," he said finally. "It's about believing you're worth knowing. The rest just follows from there." It wasn't the whole truth. The alien parasite had certainly provided a chemical shortcut to social success. But it wasn't entirely wrong either. The real change hadn't been in his biochemistry. It had been in his understanding of himself and his place in the social world around him. As he looked around the recreation lounge, watching the easy interactions between crew members, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. A bite from an alien parasite had temporarily made him irresistible to women across the galaxy. But the lasting gift hadn't been the biochemical modifications. It had been the knowledge that he was capable of being interesting, confident, and socially successful, alien intervention or not. The creature on Kepler 442b had given him a glimpse of who he could be. The rest had been up to him. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Chun was perfectly comfortable with exactly who that was. But the universe, as Marcus was learning, had a sense of humor about these things. The call came 3 weeks later, during what should have been a routine survey mission to the Proxima Centauri system. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom with barely contained excitement. All senior staff to the bridge immediately. We've received a priority transmission from Kepler 442b. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Nothing good ever came from priority transmissions, especially from planets he'd recently visited. He made his way to the bridge, noting the mixture of curiosity and concern on his colleagues' faces. The view screen showed Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist who'd taken over Marcus's research station on Kepler 442b. She looked exhausted, her usually pristine field gear stained with what appeared to be phosphorescent plant matter. "Captain Rodriguez," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We have a situation down here. It's about Dr. Chen's parasite encounter." All eyes turned to Marcus, who suddenly felt like he was back in graduate school being called out for a failed experiment. "The modifications have already worn off," he said defensively. "My biochemistry is back to normal." "That's not the problem," Dr. Vasquez continued. "The organism that bit you, we found its breeding ground. And Marcus, these things aren't native to Kepler 442b. They're from somewhere else entirely, and they've been studying human biochemistry for a lot longer than we initially thought." She gestured off-screen, and the camera panned to show a cavern filled with translucent pods, each one pulsing with the same bioluminescent glow Marcus remembered from his encounter. Thousands of them, stretching back into the darkness. "We found genetic material from at least 17 different human colonies in their breeding chambers," Dr. Vasquez said. "These organisms have been targeting humans across the galaxy, collecting samples, refining their biochemical modifications. Marcus, you weren't their first test subject, you were their final prototype." Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. "What exactly are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying these parasites have been perfecting a formula to make human males irresistibly attractive to human females. And now that they've succeeded..." Dr. Vasquez's image flickered as something moved behind her. "Now they're preparing to mass-produce the modification." The transmission cut to static. Marcus stared at the empty screen, his mind racing through the implications. If the parasites could mass-produce their biochemical modifications, they could potentially alter the reproductive dynamics of entire human populations. The evolutionary consequences were staggering. "Bridge to Medical Bay," Captain Rodriguez said. "Dr. Kim, I need you up here immediately." Dr. Kim appeared within minutes, looking distinctly frazzled. "I've been monitoring the transmission," she said before anyone could speak. "If Dr. Vasquez is correct, we're looking at a potential species-level threat. These organisms could fundamentally alter human social and reproductive behavior." "But why?" Commander Torres asked. "What do they gain from making human males more attractive?" Marcus felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. "Spread," he said quietly. "They want to spread to as many human populations as possible. If they can make their hosts more sexually successful, they increase their own reproductive opportunities exponentially." "But you said the modifications were temporary," Dr. Kim pointed out. "In me, yes, but I was a prototype, a test case. If they've perfected the formula..." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, which was still annoyingly perfect despite the stress. "They might have figured out how to make the changes permanent." Captain Rodriguez was already moving. "Set course for Kepler 442b, maximum warp. Send a priority alert to Starfleet Command and all nearby vessels. We may be looking at a quarantine situation." The journey to Kepler 442b took 3 days, during which Marcus found himself at the center of increasingly frantic research efforts. Dr. Kim ran every test she could think of, searching for any trace of the original parasite or its modifications that might have been missed. The xenobiology team analyzed every piece of data from his original expedition. Even the ship's counselor, Dr. Amanda Hayes, wanted to interview him about the psychological effects of his experience. The confidence boost was the most significant change, Marcus explained during one of their sessions. I felt like a completely different person, more assertive, more socially adept. It wasn't just that women were attracted to me. I genuinely believed I was worth their attention. Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Psychological manipulation alongside the biochemical. Clever. They weren't just changing how others perceived you. They were changing how you perceived yourself. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Marcus asked. I mean, setting aside the consent issues, the confidence boost was genuinely helpful. I'm still more socially successful now than I was before. The question, Dr. Hayes said, is whether that growth was authentic or artificially induced. And more importantly, what happens to human society if everyone has access to that kind of modification? It was a question that haunted Marcus as they approached Kepler 442b. The planet looked the same from orbit. Swirling amber clouds, red-tinged landmasses, no obvious signs of alien infestation. But Marcus knew that appearances could be deceiving, especially when dealing with organisms sophisticated enough to manipulate human biochemistry. The landing party consisted of Marcus, Dr. Kim, a full xenobiology team, and enough security personnel to handle a small war. They found Dr. Vasquez's research station abandoned but intact, with signs of hasty evacuation but no evidence of violence. Life signs are reading normal, reported Lieutenant Morrison, scanning the area with a tricorder. No immediate threats detected. They followed Dr. Vasquez's trail to the cavern she discovered, a natural formation about 2 kilometers from the original research station. As they descended into the phosphorescent-lit depths, Marcus felt an odd sense of familiarity, as if he were returning home after a long absence. The breeding chamber was even more impressive in person than it had appeared on the transmission. Thousands upon thousands of translucent pods lined the cavern walls, each one containing what appeared to be a developing parasite. But these were different from the creature that had bitten Marcus, larger, more complex, with specialized appendages that suggested they were designed for specific purposes. My God! Dr. Kim breathed, running her scanner over the nearest pod. The genetic complexity is incredible. These aren't just parasites, they're living biochemical laboratories. Where's Dr. Vasquez? Marcus asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. They found her deeper in the cavern system, in a chamber filled with what could only be described as cocoons. Human-sized cocoons, pulsing with the same bioluminescent rhythm as the parasite pods. Dr. Vasquez was inside one of them, unconscious but apparently unharmed, her body surrounded by a web of feeding tubes and monitoring filaments. She's alive, Dr. Kim confirmed, checking her readings. Vital signs are stable, but her biochemistry is changing. As they worked to extract Dr. Vasquez from her cocoon, Marcus noticed movement in his peripheral vision. The parasites were emerging from their pods, not aggressively but with obvious purpose. They moved in coordinated patterns, almost like a dance, their bioluminescent bodies creating complex light patterns in the cavern darkness. They're trying to communicate, Marcus realized. The light patterns, they're not random. Dr. Kim looked up from her medical scanner. You can understand them? Marcus concentrated on the shifting patterns of light, and somehow, impossibly, meaning began to emerge. Not words exactly, but concepts, emotions, intentions transmitted through color and rhythm. Welcome back, successful prototype. The message was clear in Marcus's mind, though he couldn't explain how he understood it. The parasites were greeting him like an old friend, acknowledging his role in their grand experiment. They're saying they've been waiting for me, Marcus told the others. I'm some kind of success story for them. You have proven the modifications work. Now we expand the program. More light patterns, more impossible communication. Marcus found himself understanding their entire plan with crystalline clarity. The parasites weren't trying to harm humanity. From their perspective, they were trying to help. They saw human reproductive and social dynamics as inefficient, hampered by psychological barriers and biochemical limitations that prevented optimal mate selection and pair bonding. Their solution was to enhance human males with their biochemical modifications, creating a generation of men who were confident, attractive, and irresistibly appealing to women. In their view, this would lead to more successful relationships, better genetic selection, and ultimately a stronger human species. The fact that this would also provide them with unlimited opportunities for reproduction was, from their perspective, a mutually beneficial arrangement. "They think they're doing us a favor," Marcus explained to the increasingly alarmed landing party. "They've studied human relationships and concluded that we're doing it wrong. Too much rejection, too much loneliness, too much inefficient mate selection. Their modifications would solve all of that. By removing free will from the equation," Dr. Kim said grimly, "women wouldn't be choosing partners based on genuine compatibility. They'd be biochemically compelled to find certain men attractive. Free will is inefficient," the parasites responded through their light patterns. "Your species suffers from emotional barriers that prevent optimal reproductive success. We remove the barriers. But what about love?" Marcus asked aloud, feeling somewhat ridiculous for having a philosophical debate with alien parasites. "What about genuine connection and compatibility? Love is biochemistry. We simply optimize the formula." The simplicity of their worldview was both terrifying and oddly appealing. They genuinely believed they could solve human loneliness and relationship dysfunction through biochemical intervention. And based on Marcus's experience, they weren't entirely wrong. The confidence boost alone had been genuinely transformative. But the cost would be the end of authentic human relationships as they existed. "We need to get out of here," Dr. Kim said, finishing her extraction of Dr. Vasquez. "Now." As they prepared to leave, the parasites made their final offer, communicated through a cascade of light patterns that left Marcus reeling with their implications. "You could be the first of the enhanced generation. Permanent modifications, perfect confidence, unlimited social success. Help us expand the program, and you will never lack for companionship again." For a moment, just a moment, Marcus was tempted. The memory of those weeks aboard the Endeavor, when every interaction had been easy and every conversation had felt like a victory, was seductive. To never again feel socially awkward or romantically rejected, to know that he could connect with anyone he wanted. But then he looked at Dr. Vasquez, unconscious in her cocoon, her biochemistry being rewritten without her consent. He thought about Captain Rodriguez and Dr. Kim and all the other women whose behavior had been manipulated by his presence. He remembered the fights that had broken out on Deep Space Station Omega-7, the relationships that had been disrupted, the chaos his modified pheromones had caused. "No," he said firmly. "Thanks, but no." The parasite's light patterns shifted to what Marcus interpreted as confusion and disappointment. "You refuse optimization?" "I refuse to take away other people's choice," Marcus replied, "even if it would benefit me." As they evacuated the cavern system, Marcus felt the parasite's attention following him, their bioluminescent glow shifting to colors he associated with sadness and frustration. They genuinely couldn't understand why he would reject their offer, why he would choose to remain unenhanced when perfection was available. The journey back to the Endeavor was completed in tense silence, broken only by Dr. Vasquez's gradual return to consciousness. The modifications the parasites had begun were reversible, Dr. Kim determined, but it would take weeks of careful treatment to restore her normal biochemistry. "They were trying to turn me into a breeding partner," Dr. Vasquez explained once she was coherent enough to talk. "Not for themselves, for their enhanced human hosts. They wanted to create a sustainable population of modified humans who could spread their influence throughout the galaxy." Captain Rodriguez was already coordinating with Starfleet Command for a full quarantine of the system. "We'll establish a monitoring station at a safe distance," she explained. "Study them, try to understand their capabilities, but prevent any further contact with human populations." "What if they try to leave the system?" Marcus asked. "Then we'll have to make some very difficult decisions," Rodriguez replied grimly. As the Endeavor departed Kepler 442b for the final time, Marcus found himself at the observation deck, staring back at the amber-clouded world where his life had been temporarily transformed. The parasites were still down there, still working on their grand plan to optimize human relationships through biochemical intervention. Part of him wondered if they might be right. Human relationships were messy, inefficient, often painful. How many people suffered from loneliness, rejection, and romantic failure? How many would gladly accept biochemical enhancement if it meant guaranteed social success? But the larger part of him knew that the messiness was the point. Love wasn't about optimization, it was about choice, about two people deciding to care for each other despite their flaws and incompatibilities. Take away the choice, and you might have perfect biochemical compatibility, but you wouldn't have love. Second thoughts? Dr. Kim asked, joining him at the observation window. Always, Marcus admitted. But I'm learning to live with uncertainty. It's part of being human. Dr. Kim smiled. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Both times. As Kepler 442b disappeared behind them, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. An alien parasite had given him a glimpse of what he could be with biochemical enhancement. But the real growth had come from learning to be confident and socially successful on his own terms. The universe was full of shortcuts to perfection, but Marcus was beginning to understand that the journey mattered more than the destination. Even if it meant occasionally walking into bulkheads and making terrible jokes. After all, that was what made him human. The Starfleet Academy auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching via holocast throughout the Federation. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included some of the most brilliant xenobiologists, ethicists, and philosophers in known space. 6 months ago, he would have been terrified to speak in front of so many people. Now, he felt only a manageable flutter of nerves, the kind that kept you sharp rather than paralyzed. The question we must ask ourselves, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, is not whether we can enhance human nature, but whether we should. The Kepler 442b parasites offered us a form of perfection, guaranteed social success, optimized relationships, the elimination of romantic rejection and loneliness. They saw our messiness as a problem to be solved. He paused, making eye contact with Dr. Kim in the front row. She smiled encouragingly, and Marcus felt that familiar warmth of genuine connection. Not biochemically induced, but earned through months of friendship and collaboration. But I've learned that our flaws aren't bugs in the system, they're features. The awkwardness, the uncertainty, the possibility of rejection. These aren't obstacles to overcome. They're what makes choosing to love someone meaningful. In the 6 months since the Kepler 442b incident, Marcus had become something of a celebrity in xenobiological circles. His first-hand experience with alien biochemical manipulation had made him a sought-after speaker and consultant. More importantly, it had given him a unique perspective on the enhancement technologies that were becoming increasingly common throughout the Federation. The parasites themselves remained quarantined on Kepler 442b, monitored by a rotating team of scientists who maintained a safe distance. They had made no further attempts to leave their world, seemingly content to wait for humanity to reconsider their offer. Marcus sometimes wondered if they understood that their gift of force compatibility was the very thing that made it worthless. The real irony, Marcus continued, is that the confidence I gained from my encounter wasn't actually due to the biochemical modifications. It came from believing, for the first time in my life, that I was worth knowing. The parasites didn't give me that belief, they just provided circumstances that allowed me to discover it. After his lecture, Marcus found himself surrounded by the usual crowd of academics and journalists, all eager to hear more about his unique experience. But his attention was drawn to a young graduate student who hung back at the edge of the group, clearly wanting to approach but lacking the confidence. Marcus recognized the look. He'd worn it himself for most of his adult life. "Excuse me," he said to the reporters, then walked over to the student. "You had a question?" The young woman, her name tag read, Sarah-chan, Xenobiology, looked startled. Yes, but it's probably silly. The best questions usually are, Marcus said with a smile that was entirely his own. "What's on your mind?" "I just wondered, how do you know if your confidence is real or if you're just fooling yourself? I mean, after what you experienced, How can you trust your own feelings about social situations? Marcus considered the question seriously. It was one he'd asked himself countless times over the past months. I think, he said finally, the key is remembering that confidence isn't about never feeling uncertain. It's about being willing to act despite the uncertainty. The parasites gave me a shortcut to that feeling, but the real work was learning to maintain it on my own. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. So it's not about being perfect? Definitely not, Marcus laughed. Just last week, I tripped over my own feet while trying to impress someone at a conference. The difference is, instead of hiding in my quarters for the rest of the event, I made a joke about it and kept going. That's growth. As the crowd dispersed and Marcus prepared to leave, Dr. Kim approached with a familiar gleam in her eye. So, she said, I've been thinking about our research partnership. Professional interest only, I assume? Marcus asked with mock suspicion. Well, Kim said, grinning, mostly professional. Though I have to admit, your complete lack of alien pheromones is surprisingly attractive. Marcus laughed. A genuine, unself-conscious sound that would have been impossible for him a year ago. In that case, Dr. Kim, would you like to have dinner? Fair warning. I'm paying with my own money, not relying on biochemical manipulation, and there's a significant chance I'll say something awkward. Sounds perfect, Kim replied. I wouldn't have it any other way. As they walked out of the auditorium together, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. An alien parasite had bitten him and temporarily made him irresistible to women across the galaxy. But the real transformation hadn't been biochemical, it had been psychological. He'd learned that confidence wasn't about being perfect or universally appealing. It was about accepting yourself, flaws and all, and believing that you had something valuable to offer the world. The parasites on Kepler 442b were still waiting for humanity to accept their gift of optimization, but Marcus knew they would be waiting a long time. Some things were worth doing the hard way. The universe was vast and full of shortcuts to perfection, but Marcus Chun was finally comfortable taking the scenic route. After all, the best discoveries about alien worlds and about yourself usually happened when you were willing to get a little lost along the way. And if occasionally he still thought about what it felt like to have every woman in the galaxy find him irresistible, well, that was between him and the stars.